This interview is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends Collection. This interview was originally conducted on September the 13th, 1972. The interview was conducted by Mr. Neil Tuohy, that's capital Tuohy. The interviewee is Mrs. Laura Letzig, and that's capital Laura, capital Letzig, of Blackwell, Oklahoma. This interview is being re-recorded on October the 3rd, 1985, for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Michener.
Set it up and get it ready. He's going to get it ready.
The date is September 13th, 1972, and I'm Neil Tuohy, and I'm at Blackwell, Oklahoma. We've come up here for the Oklahoma Christian College Living Legends to do some interviews of some of the pioneers that made the run of 93 during the Cherokee Strip opening. And I have before me Laura Letzig, who lives here in Blackwell, and I'd like for her to reminisce about some of her experiences during the early days of Oklahoma. Mrs. Letzig, would you give us a few of anything that you might remember?
Can you hold that?
No, I couldn't have the hanging on, could I?
Go ahead.
Do I? Did I say Laura Letzig? Born the 24th of January in 1878, and my father, Henry Baker, and my mother, Anna Baker. And I was born in Kansas. It's 10 miles southwest of Wichita. Bainville, Kansas was our little station. I lived on a farm until I was 15 years old, and my father sold the farm, and we moved to Wichita in the spring of 1893, and in March the 1st, 1933,
1893.
we left. Oh no, I shouldn't say that. Let's see.
That's when you moved to Wichita.
We moved to Wichita, and then my father sold the farm, and he sold all his stock and sold off his machinery and everything he had, and he kept a wagon and three horses and a cart and a plow, and then in the spring of March the 1st, we had to give possession, and we moved into Wichita, and what do we say? Where do we begin there?
That's all right. Then tell about coming down in September.
In September, a week before the opening of the Cherokee Strip, before that, the government opened up the country so the people could come down here and see the lay of the land. And my mother and father and my brother Arthur, he was 4 years old. They come down here to look this country over, and they come down to Honeywell and then come down on that trail and come down to the till they get to the Chicaska River, so they're going to see how the land looked through there, and they liked the looks of the land, and they went on then on Sunday, then they come down from there to they went
Fort?
on down to the Salt Fork
yeah.
the same day that they left Wichita.
Mm-hmm.
And in the evening they got into close to the Salt Fork, and when they unhitched the horses down there, geez, the flies with the bed, the horses broke loose and run away, and they went about a half a mile. My father finally caught them, brought them back, but my mother was scared half to death when that happened. Then after he brought them back, why, she took my brother down to into the Salt Fork dry river and dig in the sand to show my. They begin to dig. First thing she took water, and that's it. Tickled my brother so he was just excited and he just hopped and hollered and moved. And my father come a running and said, "Oh my, you mustn't holler like that. The Indians might hear you." He was scared of the Indians.
But there were still Indians around. There were a few Indians here then.
And then they stayed all night there, and the next day they went as far as Medford.
Yeah.
And when they liked the country over here, and went over there, that was the short grass country, and there was so many prairie dogs over that way, and they didn't like the looks of
Medford,
Grant County. They didn't like the look of Grant County, so they come back and they looked this country over again, and then went back to Wichita, and they were only gone 2 days. They left us 3 children in Wichita while they were down here. That was my sister Emma Beck, and she was 16, and I was 15, and my sister Rosa was 11. So we were left there. They come back in a couple of days. They were back home again, and from then on they began to make preparations for the opening of the ship. And all summer long, the farmers trained their horses, raising them, getting ready for this opening of this ship. And then in 19,
right here.
But after we come, oh no, we September in September in September, a week before the opening of this country, we come on down to. We got prepared to come down here for the opening, and we had to provide for provisions and get everything in readiness so we could leave, and we're ready for the opening of this country. Oh my, well,
Yeah, you came to Honeywell.
we came down to Honeywell. We left Sunday morning early, a week before the opening of the country, and we started off from Wichita and come down to Honeywell, and we're down at Honeywell by evening. And my father wanted to get into line. We heard there were so many sitting in line, so many thousands were already there. They all had to get registered before they could take a claim. And so we got down in the evening, and we ate our supper, and my mother took my father to the line so he could get in line, get the end of the line. He had to go 2.5 miles east of Honeywell, where they started in, and they all stepped on the line 4 abreast. and every little bit they had to get up and move as they was registered in at Honeywell.
In Kansas.
Yes, and they took him as fast as they could take him, and he was on the line. He was till about Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday noon. My mother and I, we had to take take meals to my father 3 times a day from where we camped. Mm-hmm. And when we drove along, the only bad feature about it was they wasn't prepared with the restrooms for the men. And all the protection they had was an umbrella, and they had to go into Oklahoma. And when the women come along with their lunches, those men would holler, "Sooner, sooner," so we'd all look up, which was kind of embarrassing for all of them. And then
Never thought about that angle.
well,
He finally got registered.
he finally got registered about Wednesday afternoon. Then we began making preparations for the race. And we talked and over and seen that we had plenty of provisions so we could stay down here.
That race was the same as
So
the run.
we wondered how in the world we'd ever find my dad. He bought a flag and he said, it was a white flag, and he said, "This claim is taken."
Mm-hmm.
And so we thought, well, everybody will have a white flag. How would we know his flag when we wouldn't know how to locate him?
What kind of a
so we
flag?
finally thought, if we could get a piece of red material, turkey red material, and so we went to South Haven, and sure enough we found a piece, and we got a half a yard of that turkey red cloth, and we tacked that to the stake, and we could see that from a long distance, and we could tell his flag from the rest of them. And so when
Right.
Okay.
well, then we had to get prepared then for our on Saturday, early on Saturday morning, we got up and ate our breakfast and left camp and went till we got 2.5 miles east of Honeywell. And so we could get where we could come down on the trail, so that we could follow the trail as
Back to
the
Santa
races
Fe?
left.
Santa Fe.
And when we got, so the men all unhitched their horses and watered and fed them, and we ate our dinner about 11 o'clock. The country was to be open on Saturday morning at 12 o'clock. And so we got ready for then they began to prepare to eat our dinner. They prepared, get everything in line, get it ready for the race to start at 12.
Mm-hmm.
And when the time got pretty close, we all got hitched up and got prepared and got in line where we was ready to go. The men all stood out there about 15-20 minutes for the race with a watch in a hand, watching for the time for the last minute. And my father come up to us and he said, he bid us goodbye, and he told us how to go, and we wanted to come down till we come to the Chicaska River and stay on this side, and he would know how to find us. So then the, they, the, the government had men stationed all along the line, to before the opening, and so you could see so far the races, you could see from the country was all there. You could see so many miles.
Yeah, you could see from Arkansas City to
Oh,
Medford.
yes, you could see from Arkansas City to Medford. They were all stretched out in line. And when the last minute, just before our father come out and said, well, there's one thing sure, he was going to do his best. He was going to try to get a farm. They'd either be a farm, a dead horse, a dead man. And he said, well, if he couldn't get nothing on this side of the river, he was going as far as the Salt Fork, and then he would come back and try to find us. And so we all got so nervous the last minute. Everybody was so tense, and when they waited for the last minute till the cannon was to go off at 12 noon sharp. And before the cannon went off, those men hollered, go! And of course the horses all started to run. But how it just looked like if you take a stack of feathers and open them up and let the wind blow. That's the way they started off. They all went they all went in a hurry, just flew. And when the cannon went off, well, it was about 2 minutes afterwards, so everybody hollered, and those in the wagon said, Sooners! Yeah, it was the most beautiful race you ever saw. It was a beautiful race. You never saw nothing like it. You could see so far. You could see the racing, how pretty that looked. It was beautiful, and you'll never see again.
Was it dusty though? Plenty of dust.
Dirt. Dusty. Was it dusty?
The wind blew terrible. The wind it was so hot and dusty that and the wind blew. And that's the reason when those went off, it just looked like feathers flying in the air here. So.
Could he stop anywhere he wanted to and stake a claim?
And then, so then just as soon as they were gone, we started off, and we hadn't gone very far till we saw two men that way ahead of us with big long white what do you call
flares?
Yeah, they're floating in the air.
They lit fires. They lit fires.
Oh, okay, well, they were just long streamers, white streamers, and we wondered what that was for. And it wasn't very long. They threw them down, and then here, all at once, we could see here come the fire, just a flying toward us. And we all had to go through that fire. And we had hay and provisions and feed and everything in our wagon. We didn't know what was going to happen. And our horses, they just started off on a gallop. They just flew through that fire. And there were two men ahead of us. And they looked back and I guess they saw two lone women in the wagon. And they hollered at us, "You need help?" And we said, "Oh, no, thank you." I knew I could manage our horses, but the horses were scared, and so was we.
He was
But
15.
we all made it.
drove.
We
She
all
was the
got
driver.
through the fire. Oh, we had to go about 2 blocks through that fire.
Then you picked up a little dog. You picked up a...
No, that was long before that.
Well, go on and tell it.
And then we just, after that, we got so loud and howled, and we were all so excited and kind of turned ourselves loose, and what a noisy bunch we all were, howling back and forth, and we just laughed and had more fun. I don't believe I ever laughed more in my life. Till we got down to and we just got along fine until we got to the Bitter Creek on the Henry
Roars.
Moore.
Roar. Roar.
Roll, you was on the Henry Roll place, and there was a great big hole. You had to cross the Bitter Creek, and all them horses or wagons ahead of us, there was a big hole, and the horses just jumped across the big hole, and the wagon wheels would go down and there, and putting a knock 'em off the seats. And those men, one of the men that was ahead of us, got out of the wagon, and he said, "Wait a minute, and I'm going to see if I can't do something about this." And so he got out, wasn't very long. He had a great big armload of trash and limbs and threw it in there and filled that hole. And then their wagon, their horses just walked right over it. It was all filled up solid. And we just went off nice, everyone behind us. They all,
Good neighbors.
we all made it. So we didn't have any more trouble until before we got about a half a mile from the river. Here come 2 men walking along with a gun strapped on the back, and they stopped every wagon, and they said, "Move on, move on." They didn't want any of us to stop along. They wanted us to go on over the Chicasca River, but I looked around and I saw my father's flag. I said, "Oh, there's Papa's flag." And everybody up on the line said, "Oh, there's Papa's flag." And then we turned out, and then they said, "Well, goodbye and good luck." And we waved at them and went on. And when we met our father, cut over there, there stood a wagon and 2 horses hitched back of it, and just as cool as a cucumber. And our horses were just foaming, all of it. They had been running, they were so hot. And so we said to my father, "What's that they're doing here?" And he said, "That was here before I come, but I didn't know it was on my claim until I got all the cornerstones, they were marked." And he found out that this wagon was on his land, on his claim that he staked. So he went up to there was a man there with it, and he went up to the man, talked to him, and he said, "Oh, yeah, I'm just holding it for another man." He said, "I live on the Kansas line." He said, "I've got a farm up there." And he said, "It was so hot and dry all summer, we didn't raise a thing. And that money looked so good to me." He said, "I just needed that money for my family to live on over winter." And then later, my mother and I, we walked around. They had burned. I should have said, Biographical had But he would cut all the hay around and build it up all around Blackwell here. But, he lived that what he didn't use, he burned off. And we could see those fires when we were up on the still floor in a few days before we come. We could smell the smoke in the air and wondered what that was for. But he burned that all off so that the farmers had to buy big hay from him, and he sold them all for $1. He paid about 1,000 bills a bearer, and he sold every bill.
Did he put up a house?
Huh?
Did he build a house?
Oh, no. His wife was part Indian, and she had Indian rights, and she owned some land. She owned that land right there where that was where Blackwell was wrong, you see.
That's Colonel Blackwell you're talking about. Colonel Blackwell. That was Colonel Blackwell.
That was Colonel Blackwell. That's what got the name of Blackwell. See, that's where we got our name from him. Yeah.
Well, you stayed all night, and then you came on into town, didn't you?
Oh, we stayed. My mother and I, we walked around down close to the Bitter Creek, and we could see where that man and his horse had laid all night. And this man said, "Oh, I didn't. I'm just holding this for another man." He said that was Frank Cavenger.
He was a Sooner, wasn't he?
Oh, and he said he left here at noon and went to Perry to get the filing papers for this farm. But my father was the first one to turn the soil and put up the stake. But we didn't know what to do. We knew we were going to have a contest to fight, and we knew that it was going to be a hard job unless this man would help my father out. That he was really a Sooner, you see. He was a Sooner honor. But of course he held the filing papers. After you got your stake, and then you were supposed to go to Perry get your filing papers. But of course this man had those filing papers, so he'd have to fight him to get those back.
Was there?
Did
Did he go to court?
No. So he said, "Well,
You just decided to come to town.
But we just wondered what we was going to do, you know. But we knew it could be pretty hard fixed, and it's hard enough to be there and work. But you had a farm, without a contest to fight. So we stayed there all night. And the next day we got up early Sunday morning. Next day was Sunday, and we were sitting there just debating what we should do. The people come along every little bit that's going home, and you see them sitting there, and they come up to us and they said, "There's a town site going up across the river." And so my mother and father said, "Oh, my, well, let's eat our dinner. Let's go over and see what's going on." So we ate our dinner, and we took our wagon and everything out and went across the river. And we was so surprised when we got across the river how many tents and how many, it looked like thousands of people walking around. There were so many people walking there, and it was so hot and windy and dusty and dirty, and those people, all those men just looked like colored men, but they were all white men. But oh my, was they dirty and filthy. Yeah. And so they come up to us and they said, "Oh, if we go about a half a mile east and a mile, we'll get down to the riverbed. Well, there was a nice spring down there, and we could get all the water we wanted. And we all needed cold water to drink. So we drove on down there, and we were surprised to see how many people were camping down there at the river. And so we found a nice place to camp, and we could get all the fresh water we wanted to drink, and we could water our horses and all. We had a big pail with us, and we had a bucket, and you could dip the bucket in it was all walled out. It was a nice spring that walled up, and you could get all the water you wanted, and everybody come along, stop the horses and water them and fill the barrels, and so we got, what would I say?
You want to rest a minute?
Yeah.
You want to stop?
Now,
A few days before we come down here,
now.
A few days before we come down here, along come a little dog, a little brown water spaniel. Oh, he's a beautiful little dog. He'd got lost, and so we petted him and fed him up, and was he a good watchdog? He wouldn't let nobody come near our wagon or horses. When he watched them, we brought him along. He rode with us all the way down from the line. And let's see what the next, let's see what else. Oh, we stayed there all night there, and we finally talked, wondering what we was going to do. And my mother, she tried to talk my dad out of the farm, because they didn't have every farmer has to have help. And she knew how hard we had to work in Kansas. She had to help my father. Well, whenever every farmer needs help, and she had to help him. You couldn't get help those days. And after Emma and I, my sister, and Emma and I got big enough, well, we had to go and help, and we let our mother help so she could stay in the house. I was going to tell her about my grandmother, could I?
Well, no, go on and tell about Blackwell.
Oh, Blackwell? Oh,
well, you stayed a week, and then you went back to Wichita.
Oh, my, it's 2 weeks.
All right.
See, no, I'm going to tell her how we got this.
Well, tell it.
Got my father talked out of it. My father, father said, well, what would I do if I all I know is farming? And so they finally started, well, I didn't know what he was going to do. And so next day was Monday. So my father said, well, I'm going uptown to see what I can see. And when he got up there, he met 2 men on the street, and they was going to go home. They were from Salina, Kansas, and they had 2 tents and some groceries. And my father thought, oh my, well, that would be nice. We could start a grocery store, maybe, you know. So he bought the tents and the groceries, and he brought them home. And the men went out to Salina. And then so the next day was Tuesday morning, and so he heard he was going to sell lots uptown. And my mother and father thought, well, they'll go up see if they can buy some lots. And so, well, they decided my father bought 2 lots, one for a business and one for a resident. Everybody lived on Main Street those days. So he bought 2 lots, and he got one block and one in the other. And then he thought, well, he'll just start building a building right away. You could order lumber from Kildare. And then so when we looked, so my mother and father went down after they got them 2 lots. They looked around, they couldn't see where they could put their like a grocery store if they could start it. And when they looked around, every other tent was a grocery store. So, oh my, that was out. So now what? Well, they thought maybe my mother was a good cook when she could, maybe we could start a restaurant and get rid of our groceries. So, you know, they looked around, and first thing they seen, every other tent was a eating house, so that was out. Well, then we had all them nice groceries. Well, we took out a lot of that stuff that we had. Oh, they had canned salmon, yes, and sardines, and they had, what did we have? All kinds.
Ginger snaps.
Huh?
Ginger snaps.
Oh, we had all kinds of, we had so many lemons and all kinds of food that we could get, that was canned, that we could buy and bought them. And I forgot. I had a whole bunch of stuff written down, what all had.
It doesn't make any difference.
Hmm?
It doesn't make any difference.
It don't make any difference. Well, we took a lot of stuff out, so we had a good supply of food on hand. And my father sold the groceries. He didn't have a bit of trouble getting rid of them. He got rid of them. And he took the 2 tents and put them up on one of the buildings where we was going to have a resident. And then that was Tuesday, wasn't it? And on Wednesday, our water got so bad. We couldn't drink that water. We couldn't use it in tea, we couldn't use it in coffee, and we couldn't use it in lemonade. It was just terrific. We just thought we couldn't stand it. It was so hot and dry, and we needed water. And they started drilling a well on Blackwell on Main on Sunday. And my father said, well, just as soon as they get this, our water in town, we'll get that pump ready. Well, we'll move into town. And by Wednesday afternoon, they struck water. So we made preparations to go up into town, and we pulled up and moved into our big tent where we unloaded everything we had in the wagon. We had fields of hay and a lot of stacks of feed, ground feed for the horses, and had all our provisions, and we had a stove, a gasoline stove, and had and building and all of our vegetables, all that we had.
Then it rained and turned cold.
So we after we got everything in, all unloaded, well, that was on Friday. And Friday we got everything loaded up, and on Saturday afternoon it began to cloud up, and by all night long it rained. It rained we had a hard rain, and the next morning was Sunday. Was it? On Sunday morning, I started to get old. My father left just a little tent and had the right side of the big one. We moved everything we had, our sacks of feed and hay and all our provisions, all put in a big tent. My mother and father slept in a big tent, and they gave me the little tent. It was right upside of the big one, so they gave me that for my bed. And till my father, we opened up a couple loose bales of hay and put that down and put the.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
You pull up and opened it up for a bit of that.
Okay.
We opened up a couple of bales of hay and that made such a nice bed, and we put a nice white cover on it, and mine was that soft I could lay down on it and stretch out. By the way, that was the first time since we had left Wichita that I could stretch out all of the time. Before I was laying on them hard sacks. That was my bed, all curled up on those hard feed sacks. And then when my father, so that it kept on raining all night, and then when I got up on Sunday morning, I started to get up, and I thought, oh my, I could hear the rain still hitting on the tent. I knew it was raining, and I knew it wasn't going no place, and I thought, well, this is so comfortable now, so I'll just stay here. And it wasn't very long. I could hear my mother and father moving around in the tent, and I wondered what they was doing. Pretty soon when my father stuck his head in, he said, "Aren't you getting up?" I said, "Well, what for?" And he said, "Well, he laughed, and he said, if you don't, you'll be floating down the river." And I said, "Oh, is it raining in here?" And I put my foot down, and I got my foot down, and that hay, got into water, putting it up to my knees. And I said, "Oh, my." It didn't take me very long to get out of bed. The first thing I thought, oh my, are my clothes floating around? But luckily I put them all up high, they were all good and dry, so it didn't take long. We finally ate our breakfast, and it kind of cleared off, and the water flow got out of our tent, and we could walk around, and let's see, what was we doing? I could pull it
Then
off.
you and your dad went back to Wichita.
Oh, oh,
Yeah.
well, my father thought, well, what would he do? And he thought, well, if he could, maybe we could start a saloon. He didn't know nothing about it, but he thought if he'd get a good bartender that would help him, maybe he could get started. So we made preparations, and my mother said someone had to stay with our provisions there. And so my father and I, we went up to Wichita together. So I got myself ready to go, and then we went up to Honeywell, in a day. I think in about a day we had everything ready, and my father ordered some more lumber. We got that building started, so we'd have a building to get into when they come back. And it didn't take long. They just put them up. All they done was to seal it was sealed inside. And then they varnished them, and the wood looked black and dark, like the new homes do nowadays. Yeah. And then we went up the next morning. We got up to Honeywell, and my father said, well, there's one thing more I'm going to do. I'm going to hunt up this man that lives up here, see what he'll say about that farm. If he would just, all I ask from him is to just that he would show that man that he was on there the night before, and he would pay him well for it. And that man looked at me there and he said, well, I'll tell you, I told this fellow I would. He said, I needed the money so bad. He said, I hate to go back on my word. I promised him I would. And my father said, well, now listen, I'll pay you well for it. That's all I'd ask of you. And he kind of shook his head. He didn't think he wished he could. So we said, well, all right, that's all we wanted to know. We went back to Honeywell to put up our horse, and we was going to take the train into Wichita. And so we got away about, maybe 2 blocks, and I looked around, and I said, oh, Papa, what is that man standing out in the middle of the street with his hat in his hand? I said, I believe he kind of changed his mind. I believe if he'd go back, he was just standing there looking down at his hat, And so my father said, well, I'm going on now. He said, I've got my mind made up. We'll just go on. So we put up our horses, the livery stable. We was in the cart, and I just took the cart out and then he ordered some more lumber and had everything ready. So when he come back, he'd have his building ready. And so when we got up to Wichita, I said, well, he's going to hunt up Mr. Bellman. He was a good tailor. And he said, I know a bet he might know a good bartender. If I could just get a hold of a good bartender. And so when we got up to Wichita, my father said, well, yeah, of course, all we had with us was our hot summer clothes and our sunbonnets. And I said, when we got to Wichita, my father wouldn't walk down the street with me. He said, you go through the alley. You go down to the alley, and I'll go on and hunt up Bellman. So when we got there, sure enough, Mr. Bellman said, I believe I know a man that'll go for it. Won't you do it? So they got Morris Motsky. He was a bartender there for years in Wichita. And when we got there, oh my, yes, he wanted to come down and see what this country looked like. He was glad to come. And he said yes, and he knew how to start it and all. So they went to the what do you call them big places where you buy stuff?
Store.
No, they
General store?
Oh, yes, in a great big where you buy your material for your. And so he knew just what to order and what to get, and they bought some beautiful fixtures all for uh, for the for the front window, you know, the great big mirror and all kinds of fancy glassware, looked like cut glass. There was someone that was cut glass, made of beautiful, what do you call it, front?
Front of the store. Yeah.
And so when they got that lined up, and he bought a nice, a big pool table, and got some nice card tables and stuff that he really needed, and he got it all fixed up. And then after he come back to, he said, well, so he said, girls, I got everything fixed up. He said, I bought some awful nice stuff. He said, I spent a lot of money, but he said, I believe I'll be prepared. And this man said, well, yes, he'd stay with him. He'd be glad to do. We wanted him for at least a year, and he said, oh, he'd stay with him as long as he wanted him to. And he was awful good. He was such a nice man, mine. He was such a help to my father. And then, my father stayed all night, and then the next day he loaded up and took all we couldn't have froze to death after the drilling, before we come to, I forgot to tell that. We couldn't have froze to death. All we had was our little summer clothes, and nothing for covers for our beds and nothing. So I hunted up all my mother's warm Christmas winter underwear and everything I could find, and bedding, and loaded it up. And my father brought that down then with him, and got all his clothes lined up, so they were prepared to stay for the cold winter. My father wanted the family to stay with it over winter, and then we come back the next spring, first of March, no, of April. 1st of April, we moved to Blackwell.
And stayed. You remained there.
Yeah. You stayed here then. You came here. Yeah, they've been here ever since.
What was your father's given?
Henry Beck.
Henry Beck, and his wife was
Anna Beck.
Anna Beck. Well, we'll conclude this interview, and this Neil Tuohy for Living Legend signing off at Blackwell, Oklahoma, September the 13th, 1972.
She's got a wonderful